Hello everybody, this is Mithril Zenith. Welcome back to Map Recap. We're going through all of the maps in the Archanea games of Fire Emblem, and today we have Chapter 2, Pirates of Galder. Now, this map is somewhat interesting for the differences that it has, particularly with FE3 compared to 11 and 1, so let's get to it. First of all, this is the second map in FE1 and FE3 Book 1, not counting prologue, second map in Fire Emblem 11, so you have a number of brand new units that join right at the start: Board, Cord, Barst, and Ogma. Their positions, apologies for the map being a little bit small, I'm gonna just pan between. Their positions are basically the same in all versions of the game. You have these numbered positions again for everyone else. Depending on how many units you kept alive, they have a particular order in which they'll come in. We have some pirates and thieves up here and a hunter. Some pirates over here spread out. Pirates and hunters, including Castor or Kashim if you're on an older translation. And a couple of cavaliers who will run across. As you can see in FE3, we have the same sort of thing up here, pirates and thieves up here, and a hunter. No pirates in the middle, they're all clustered up here. And over here, also no pirates in the middle, all clustered over here and clustered up here. So Fire Emblem 11, once again, spreads out units, adds more units into the middle of the map, so there's a little bit less dead space. Unit-wise, overall, there is some benefit to that. I have had some people asking me to talk about the stat differences where relevant in certain modes, particularly harder modes of Fire Emblem 11, and while I think in general the placement of units doesn't change, the stats do matter somewhat, and so I'll just briefly mention that here, is that harder modes give enemies higher weapon ranks as well as higher stats overall, and eventually as you get later in, they will forge their weapons or give them unique weapons in like the very end game maps, like they'll get like forged brave lances. Right here, there really is not much difference aside from just higher stats and then A rank weapons, and weapon rank matters because it gives bonuses in Shadow Dragon, but those bonuses are turned off when you have weapon triangle disadvantage. So if you're using swords against these pirates, they won't get their like +3 to hit, +20 to like +3 to might, +20 to hit, or whatever it is that they have from having A rank axes. So good to know, important to know. Makes lance using units a lot weaker in these early chapters, and then sword units a lot weaker in later chapters. If you're wondering about the music, I am listening to the Terraformers soundtrack because nobody wants to listen to Marth Embarks for 26 maps straight, which is the only song that was available in FE1 aside from the final map had a different song, and then the songs between chapters and whatnot. FE3, if I remember right, did mix it up a little bit, though most of the music was saved for Book 2, and Fire Emblem 11 had a couple different songs, I think, but again, mostly just that same one song. And it gets old after a while, so I'm not going to be playing it every single time. Back to FE1, let's talk about the houses a little bit, because this is another interesting change between all three versions. Now, Fire Emblem 1, you get houses talking about a house here or here, one of these two, that talks about Daros, a recruitable pirate. You have the other house talks about curate experience, curates or clerics being Riss's class, the healing class. In FE1, they talk about they get experience just for participating in combat as long as they survive, because Staves didn't give experience in FE1. In FE11, they talk about they get experience just for healing their friends. This house over here talks about hammers, saying, hey, hammers are good against armor units. You might want to pick up one or a few. I think one of your people starts with a hammer in their inventory, in FE1 at least. And I think in FE11 one of them starts with it as well. But in FE3 they do not. And we'll get into that. Fire Emblem 3, you don't get Riss. You don't get a hammer. In fact, they've really pared down the axes available to you. And you don't have this supply tent. So something I'm going to point out is that in Fire Emblem 1, you accessed the supply convoy via these tents on maps. And so it was really obnoxious having to go to a tent, visit, drop off your items, bring them back in inventory, whatever, move, go with another unit, manage. So oftentimes you would end up where you would finish the map, and then instead of seizing right away, you would just sit and wait for a couple turns while everyone manages their inventories. Not so much on early maps, but on late maps especially, which is why you'll end up seeing a tent at the start and at the end of a lot of maps. And we'll talk about that when that shows up. Fire Emblem 3, Marth is the convoy, so they decided, hey, let's put a house here that talks about Marth being the convoy, and that if you stand next to Marth, or Marth himself can click supply and get into the convoy and access it. Great stuff. Glad they have a house here in the position of the original supply convoy tent talking about it. I think it's a very cool idea, so people who were familiar with the first game playing through this are like, hey, where's the supply tent? We'll be told, yeah, Marth's the supply tent. Tent is completely absent in Fire Emblem 11. No house talking about it. I guess they just assume that you'll realize that Marth is the convoy. Yeah. Village up here, another slight difference. It talks about the next chapter, talks about Princess Lena, or one of them calls her Princess Lena. I believe it's FE3, but maybe that could just be a translation issue. Anyway, Lena of Macedon is captured by the pirates or bandits or whatever they call them, and then you're given some money to help out. In Fire Emblem 3, you're given 3,000. In Fire Emblem 1 and 11, you're given 5,000. Now, this is something that I find interesting to think about, which is also in the last map, you got half as much money in Fire Emblem 3. You only got 5,000 compared to the 10,000 in 1 and 11. So I think what this represents is that in Fire Emblem 3, the developers knew, hey, we kind of gave the player way too much money in FE1. They didn't know what to do with it. Let's pare it back, give them a little bit less money, make them actually have to manage it. In Fire Emblem 11, they gave them the amount of money that they earned in Fire Emblem 1, but they had a lot more things to spend it on, with the forge, with some more expensive weapons being available, stuff like that. So, interesting thing that I noticed. Anyway, talking about this map, we also don't have Daros in Fire Emblem 3. Daros does not exist, so not only do you not get Riss, and so the house that talks about Riss doesn't need him, you don't get Daros, so the house that talks about Daros doesn't need to talk about him. So what do they talk about? One of these houses talks about skill and speed. One of them talks about archers and hunters being locked to 2 range and not being able to attack up close. And one of them talks about the difference between weapon ranks going from iron to steel to silver. Iron is worse, silver is best, you need high weapon ranks to be able to use silver weapons. Those 3 houses are all entirely different from their FE1 and FE11 counterparts, which I think is interesting to note, because they thought about, hey, you're down 2 units, it doesn't make sense for us to talk about Daros when he's not here, it doesn't make sense for us to talk about Curate when you don't have one yet, and it doesn't make sense for us to talk about hammers when the hammer doesn't exist. 3 different things that FE3 did not have, and so had to change every house. Speaking of Daros, he is up here. I forget exactly which one he is, but he moves first on enemy phase, and he will recruit himself on his turn, at least in FE11. I forget if he does so in FE1. I'm pretty sure he does. But he'll move and talk to Marth if Marth's in position to talk to him. And after which, because he moves first, he will very quickly die to the other pirates who attack if you try to do it turn 1. So a safer play is to kind of lure him down for a turn and then talk to him on player phase and then run away, have him retreat, whatever. This is also made a little bit easier in Fire Emblem 11 because they took 3 of the pirates that were up here and spread them out over here, as you see. 5 pirates up here. 2 pirates up here, and one of them's Daros. So, a little bit less likely that Daros gets himself killed, but, it still happens with extreme regularity, especially on Hard 5, where you retreat Marth, up to the fort, let Daros talk to him, and Daros dies to the next pirate, because Daros doesn't get the super boosted stats that the other Hard 5 enemies do. Daros, overall, not a good unit, but he starts in an area where you can show off, hey, he's a pirate, he has water walking. Your other fighters don't have water walking, so it really shows off the difference there. Aside from that, the map is pretty well suited to placing some tougher units up here to take on these units that try to flank you. The thieves, generally, it depends on the version. In FE3, at least, they aren't aggressive, and they just try to rush to the village. So if you block the bridge or block here, they won't try to get to the village and either stay standing still, or if you hurt them, they'll go to the fort, or they'll try to like run to the farthest point away from you as possible. So thieves, don't have to worry too much about them. These pirates, on the other hand, quite dangerous. They will not get blocked by the bridge, but they will swarm around the bridge through the water and be able to attack you that way. One of them, if I remember right, has a hand axe. The rest of them just have iron axes. But that hand axe is quite dangerous. So, gonna have to pay attention to that. I forget the specifics on this map. I think they just have an iron axes across the board, and maybe the hand axe one is like over here. If they still have a hand axe pirate, which I think they do, but I don't remember. You also have a hunter up here, so just in case you were thinking of bringing Sita up here to flank and attack around here, yeah, that's not going to happen. So the game, by putting a hunter over here, kind of encourages Sita to move to the left, which then allows her to recruit Castor, or Cashim for older translations. If you're careful, because he's also a hunter and will kill her, or any of your other units as well, if he comes in his way. You don't mess with Castor. He actually, as a hunter, has reasonable speed and strength. So you're given a lot of units. Once again, 4 more units in every game. 5 to 6 more if you include the recruitables in FE1 and 11. What do? I think the natural impetus is to try and block the bridge. Put Doga up here, choke the bridge. But then the pirates come around, walk on water, flank him, attack whoever's behind him. Really easy way to lose Gordon or Riss or whoever else you're trying to hide behind. So another option is to try and line up a little bit. Maybe defend on the fort then. You start right next to a fort, and then so you're given the opportunity to, hey, bring the pirates down. They fight on land instead of on the sea because, as we may have learned from the previous chapter, pirates fighting on the sea get a lot of avoid. So if you fight them on the fort, you actually are at a bonus where they're not getting avoid bonuses, but you're getting avoid and the healing. It does mean that you're getting attacked by multiple pirates at once, and so you probably won't be able to survive that with most units. So Doga on a fort might be able to help, at least with the initial luring, but then you're going to need the rest of your units to help clear them out on player phase. Maybe you line up some units, like taking, Board, Cord, and Barst here, line them up, so one of them's on the fort, so that way you're only really getting attacked by 1 or 2 at a time. That could be useful, though the Hunter, again, kind of messes with that formation. It is a really tricky defensive position to take because of the water-walking pirates and the Hunter. And so asking the player to do this fairly challenging setup early on, second chapter of the game, really asks a lot about the player and really starts challenging them strategically of like, oh, how do I manage a defensive front when I'm also wanting to charge left across the map? There's more houses, there's the village over here, there's these enemies that start over here but will start charging towards you. And I think in some ways, Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon taking some of the units away from here and adding them to the rest of the map dilutes some of that energy. It doesn't remove it because, the pirates are still threatening. I mean, one of them is, the other's Daros and he'll want to join. The thieves are a little more aggressive in Shadow Dragon, if I remember right, and the hunter's still a hunter. So while you have the added threat right away of having to wall off these bridges and whatnot, or attack very aggressively, make a much more decisive turn on the left flank, I think the upper flank being weakened this much makes it a little bit less strategically deep. Granted, once you start hitting high difficulties in Shadow Dragon, you'll be very thankful that they trimmed down and spread out the fighters, because having 5 pirates attacking on this ridge, turn 1, is not a winnable fight for pretty much anyone on hard 5 difficulty. Jagan can't survive to that, Doga can't survive to that, none of your units really can take enemies one-on-one, let alone 2v1, 3v1, 5v1. That's not really tenable. Even with the fort, it doesn't give you enough avoid to meaningfully, dodge all of that. And they're pirates, so they're not weak to stuff like the wing spear, so you can't just effective damage your way through. So definitely trimming it back for Shadow Dragon. I can see spreading it out, how that is a benefit, particularly for the high difficulties. But I think on these lower difficulties, being able to say, hey, the first version of the map has this much, like this basically 2 groups of units you have to worry about. The ones right here and the ones all the way over here, begins to then ask the player, hey, how are you going to split your army from turn 1? And if they split their army too weak in the back, then, well, they kind of get overwhelmed by the pirates. If they split it too weak in the front, then they have to pull back towards where their army is. You have these cavaliers that will ride out to kind of chase you down, but that's still a couple turns of travel away. So props to Shadow Dragon for, I guess, overall improving the map, and particularly for knowing how strong it was going to get with its harder difficulties, and trimming down the cluster here, because this cluster here, with the cavaliers and everything, at the very least you have more time to set up against it. You can fish it out differently. I think some of these might not even be fully aggressive. I think some of them only aggro once you get into their attack range. Others can charge across the map. I forget which ones do what. Props to Shadow Dragon for, I guess, yeah, improving on the map. Yes, you do have less of a focus on, hey, how do you defend this really, honestly, awkward defense point? But I think comparing it to this, like, okay, you defend the defense point, then you have a couple turns of just kind of moving this way while the pirates slowly filter towards you. It's a little boring, I will say. Not too much to think about. You do have defensive positions, the forests, the fort, the bridges, but because pirates walk on water, they kind of just mean you don't care about defensive positions. And it sucks to say that, but it's true. It's like, hey, I'm holding this bridge against hunters who shoot from 2 range and pirates who walk on water around me. It's not really that helpful. The only other thing I have to say on this map is the boss has a hand axe. The boss on Shadow Dragon in particular is pretty notorious for being a run ender for people on hard 5, because the only really safe way to attack him is with Ogma, because none of other units have the speed to match him on hard 5, and no one can attack him from safety because he has a hand axe. So you either use Ogma or Marth if you got some good level ups and you're playing full content patch or something, to chip him down, and eventually kill him. Go in with like a Silver Lance on Jagan or something, go for a risky attack. Or very slowly wear out his hand axe. Break his hand axe, break his weapon. That is a legitimate strategy for Shadow Dragon Hard 5, because the boss is just so high statted, so overstatted, that none of your units can really take him on. They all get doubled except for pretty much Ogma. Unless you have some very, very lucky level ups and have been focusing on another unit. So yeah, that's the boss. That's this map overall. I will say, yeah, now that I've thought about it and talked about it, I like the way Shadow Dragon does it. Oh, I didn't even talk about this. Shadow Dragon introduces save points, where you can have a unit spend their turn on a save tile to consume the tile and allow for a mid-map save. I think this is a little bit awkward position for a save tile, but it makes sense. It's like, okay, you probably have dealt with the stuff on the back end, you're happy about that, you've dealt with the immediate onrush, and you're about to take on, here, try to lure out Castor, so I guess that's something else I can talk about. Lure out Castor so Sheeta can talk to him. Decent point to save. Any unit can save, doesn't have to be Marth. So that's something to think about. Something that I think the map, Shadow Dragon as a whole, tends to do pretty well, but we'll cover some of the better and worse save points as they come up. aside from that, yeah, it's just luring out Castor so Sheeta, your Pegasus Knight, can talk to him. Having the second hunter, who really likes to buddy-buddy up with Castor, means you kind of have to lure him out and kill the other hunter in order to talk to him. But Castor and the other hunter are not really slouches, especially this early on. Most of your units are going to take a lot of damage, so it teaches you, hey, maybe you lure them out with Drog, if Drog isn't stuck in the back here. And so by doing that, I'm going to have to make sure I turn down the music in post, because it's very loud for me. If you lure him out with Drog, then he's not taking too much damage, you can do that. You just have to be careful of the pirates, who can probably deal some more substantial damage, at least on harder difficulties. So it's very interesting that they warn you that your Pegasus Knight's weak to arrows. She definitely is. She'll get one shot. And then you have to have your Pegasus Knight talk to a hunter to recruit them. So you have to manage that risk. You cannot guarantee, hey, everything's going to be perfectly safe. It's like, no, you have to plan out moving into a danger zone to talk to a hunter in order to recruit them. And he's actually a fairly viable unit. Like, he doesn't promote in Fire Emblem 1, so a lot of people don't like that, but Hunter in general is pretty superior stats to Archer in FE1. The promotion to Sniper does put snipers over Hunters generally, but Hunters are not bad. Castor himself is pretty good. Definitely worth talking to and recruiting, but that's the risk you have to take. You have to manage. I think that's all that I wanted to talk about the map. Overall, I kind of like it. I do think that by throwing pirates as the main enemy early on that walk on water, it really hurts a player's ability to play with the map choke points and the map features in the way that they would want to. I think that's definitely a weakness of the early game, and something that is improved in later games, whereas instead of pirates and a lot of water, you have bandits and maybe some mountains, but you can like lure them off the mountains. So it teaches you, hey, don't attack them when they're in safe zones, and they can ignore some terrain, but there's still other terrain that you can actually use for, you know, walling off or limiting movement and whatnot. Right now with pirates with the water, especially in FE1 and FE3, it's like, cool, it slows them down a little bit, but there's no safe place to fight them that's like off the water. Like, you have the fort and that's it, but your units can't survive, you know, getting surrounded. Jagan is not Seth. Jagan can't, like, tank all the enemies. Like, he'll kill them all with his Silver Lance, but he will die in return if enough of them hit him. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the second map of Fire Emblem 1, 3, and 11. Let me know what you think about this map in the comments down below. Let me know if there's anything I missed or anything you wanted me to talk about, and I will address that later if I get around to it. Anyway, thanks so much. You have a great day. This is Mythos Zenith signing out.